We Get Outdoors Nation. Today we're joined by a guy who loves nothing more than bobbing around in a boat he's made himself, sitting by a fire, hopefully drinking a whiskey and hanging out with his mates, as well as teaching everybody else the arts of bushcraft, survival, tracking and everything else. Stephen Hanton, welcome to the We Get Outdoors podcast.
Hi there, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So what should the world know about Stephen Hanton?
Loaded question. A little bit about me then. I've been into bushcraft. I went on my first bushcraft course when I was 15, and up until that point, I'd been watching Ramir's programs on the television like mad at that age, and back in the days of VHS, and rewinding them and watching them, rewinding them, watching them, and really getting into it. And I did my first course at 15, and I got to the end of that week, which was all kinds of bushcraft skills, and I just said, that's the subject for me. That's what I want to spend the rest of my life doing. So I suppose very lucky at an early age to find a bit of a calling. And fast forward 21 years, and I've been teaching bushcraft survival skills, learning as much as I could about these subjects for many years. Teaching professionally for about 15 years. I did a pretty intensive apprenticeship in the early years. I was at university for 4 years studying education, which is, I feel, kind of given me a good grounding in being able to actually teach these skills to some level. And I guess I'm just fascinating. I've never lost my enthusiasm or fascination for natural history, bushcraft, survival, exploring places, I guess adventure, and all the things that come with it. I guess I would just stress that there are quite a few ways you can approach the subject of wilderness skills, bushcraft, survival, whatever you want to call it, and nobody can really agree on a term, and they all mean different things to different people. But I guess my focus with all these things is kind of two things. It's natural history, so what nature, learning about nature, the plants, the trees, the animals, and all the things that enrich our experiences there. That's one side of it that is really a big interest of mine. And then the second side of things is it's kind of the crafting and making element of it. It's being able to actually engage with the landscape. That's what bushcraft is. That's how bushcraft's different from lots of other outdoor pursuits for me, because you're actually interacting with the natural world. So you're learning a tree so that you can use the properties of that tree to potentially create something. And that ultimately is what bushcraft and wilderness skills is all about for me.
What was it, age 15, in that week that lit that light bulb or that spark of, my gosh, this is for me?
I think all of it, really. I mean, it was an introduction. It's a course that is taught in various ways. Certainly in the UK, different companies still teach a course that's very similar to it, and it's such a great course because you've got a little bit of fire, a little bit of edible medicinal plants, a little bit of animal tracking, a little bit of, say, friction fire lighting techniques, a little bit of shelter building. You get an introduction to all these different skills. And I think I got to the end of the week and my mind was absolutely blown. Before I went on it, I thought, oh, maybe we'll do a little bit of fire lighting, and maybe we'll learn how to identify 2 or 3 trees. And I was just awestruck by how deep the subject was and how many amazing subjects there were and how much you could cram into a week. And I think, first of all, the diversity of subjects and all the interesting stuff you can do, but also the inspirational teachers as well. I'd have to say that, I'd have to say that course was really well run, and the people who were running it really lit a bit of a fire inside me as much as the subject did. And that's actually what gave me a bit of a passion for teaching as well. I think back to, when you've been teaching for 20 odd years, sometimes you forget what it's like to be a student. And I sometimes try to force myself to remember what it's like to be in a class and be introduced to a subject for the first time, and how important the role of the teacher delivering those lessons is. And I try to keep that enthusiasm with my teaching as much as I possibly can.
I've trained thousands of paddle sports coaches all around the world over the past 15 years. And whenever I'm watching a paddle sports coach doing an assessed coaching session, you can have 2 coaches going through the motions of exactly the same thing. Doesn't really matter what it is. And there's some that I'm like, oh yeah, I suppose they're ticking the boxes. And there's others who I'm like, holy crap, I just want to go and get involved in that. I don't care that it's like the most simple thing ever. The way they're approaching it has this infectiousness about it that you just want to go and roll your sleeves up, get involved. And I guess, is that what you experience from those people, that like level of infection?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the you can teach something in so many different ways, can you? Can't you? And I think as a teacher, I try to look at a group and try to um, certainly look at the individual needs of the group. And I think we're kind of fortunate, certainly on that course and the courses I teach. We try to run courses, or we try to design a course so there's plenty of time for everybody. We keep the group size small. I think that makes quite a big difference. I think starting with a small group size and having particularly long teaching days, as you might do in bushcraft, where we're all out in the woods together, we're eating together, we're living together, we're spending 18 hours a day together at times. I think it already is a good atmosphere for learning because there's plenty of time to be able to dedicate to each person. But I think being able to look at each learner and look at the needs of what each learner is absolutely crucial. And I think a good teacher can spot what a learner needs, and that's what teaching is about. We used to say when we were looking for apprentices, we used to say to them, we can teach you the hard skills. That's not a problem. I can teach you how to rub sticks together. That's the easy part. The difficult part is teaching you how to engage with learners and make sure that you're teaching that skill in a very specific way that's pertinent to them. And that's something you can learn. And good teachers, I frequently see good teachers have those attributes.
I remember when I did one of my first outdoor instruction courses, and jeepers, it's a long time ago, probably 26 or so years ago, that the guy delivering the course told me that we were actually in the entertainment industry. And I was like, no. I think it was my mountain leader training or something like that, like a long time ago. And I'm like, no, we're going up the mountain and it's navigation and it's pacing and it's all that what's in my rucksack and the flora and fauna. And he's like, you'll learn when you have to make money out of this, that all that's nice to have stuff, but actually you're there to entertain people and keep them entertained. And it's kind of stuck with me for the whole of my career that if you can make people laugh and smile, they tend to learn more and tend to come back as well.
Yeah, and another one is because I think it's important on the bushcraft courses that I've spent most of my life teaching. We cater for people and we eat together, and it's part of the feel of the course and it's part of the community. And our little mantra has always been, you can teach whatever bushcraft you want as long as you feed people well. Everybody leaves happy. So that's another thing you want to get right.
That is so true. So true. So with your bushcraft, you've spent a lot of time delving into the world of tracking, and you've even got some quite fancy qualifications. How did you enter into that rabbit hole?
Well, that rabbit hole began when I was at university. And I remember I studied education, and in third year of university, it was a 4-year degree in Scotland. We do 4 years, and we got to third year, and they said you have to do a work experience placement, and it has to be somewhere in the UK for 6 weeks because we have to be able to visit you when you during your placement to check that everything's going well. And I just thought, well, it's going to be difficult for me to find a 6-week placement in bushcraft and survival in the UK, a company that will take me and do something that I'm really interested in. So I wrote an email to lots of different countries all over the world. I wrote about 50, in fact, there were letters actually. I wrote letters to about 50 different companies, and I had 3 responses. One was from a guy in Holland who's since become a friend, who said, well, I can't take you for 6 weeks, but I can take you for a week. And so I did that anyway, but that wasn't part of my placement. So that was a nice little bonus. And one was from a company in the UK who said, sorry, we don't have any space, but good luck. And then the last company was a company in Maine in New England who basically just wrote me a one-liner saying, yeah, great, sounds perfect. We've got a TP, you can come and live on the land, just get on a plane and it's no problem. So I remember getting extremely excited about it, got on the internet and found out this company ran natural history training, animal tracking specifically. And I didn't really know much about tracking. I knew I was interested in it, but I hadn't ever actually delved under the skin. I had no idea how vast the subject was. And I went into my university lecture and I said, great news is I've sorted out a placement, but it's in New England. And he said, well, I'm sorry, you won't be able to do it because it's not in the UK. And I said, well, that's fine, I quit. And he said, you can't quit. You've only got a year left of your degree. I said, I want to do this. It's in New England. It's learning how to animal track. It's everything I want to do. I quit. He said, okay, fine. We'll let you go. So I ended up going there. And yeah, it was a company called White Pine Programs. They're still going. They do amazing work in Maine, southern Maine, and natural history. They do a lot of stuff for kids, also adults, but basically natural history programs, animal tracking, survival, bushcraft, all that stuff. And it opened my eyes because the people who ran the company and the people who were teaching the lessons were exceptionally talented naturalists and animal trackers. And I had no idea how much there was to learn when it came to natural history and tracking. And they introduced me to this system, which is called Cyber Tracker, which is actually born in South Africa. I mean, you're probably familiar with it. But ultimately, they introduced me to this idea that there was an international standard of animal tracking, and you could do these assessments, and they were very difficult and very rigorous. And at that time, they were only happening in South Africa and in North America. And while I was there, they said to me, well, long story short, I did that 6-week placement, became friends with these people, and I went every year for many years. I went every winter. Lived in a teepee out in the land, and sometimes even in Dan's house, the guy that hosted me, who's a very good friend of mine now. And yeah, they said, you've learned enough about New England, you should do one of these assessments in animal tracking. And I knew how difficult the standard was, and I thought, you've got to be joking. So anyway, for about 4 weeks straight prior to one of the assessments, I read as many books as I could. I went out every day and I followed animals for hours and hours and hours. And eventually I got to the point where we sat the assessment. It's a 2-day assessment. It's very difficult. And I ended up scoring 94%. And I kind of blew my own mind. And Dan, who was sort of mentoring me, was incredibly impressed and said, wow, that's amazing. You've managed to learn that much. And I was so obsessed with it. I was so into it. I put so much time into it. And that's what got me hooked. That was the rabbit hole that got me into tracking. And I sort of came back to the UK full of this system and this idea that you could reach kind of a level which was so far beyond what most people in the UK were practicing at the time. Because tracking is a skill that historically we've lost, many years ago. This system I'm talking about, Cyber Tracker, was really developed in South Africa, and it was developed by a guy called Louis Liebenberg, who spent most of his life living and learning and studying Bushman trackers. And so that's the kind of level that we're operating at. And that system has kept that level and kept that bar high. And since then, long story short, that system has now moved to North America. And I was, myself and a good friend of mine, Ben McNutt, were responsible for bringing the first Cyber Tracker evaluation to the UK. And now it's spread all over Europe. And there are lots of people getting trained and assessed. And essentially that system, that rabbit hole that I started off, has led to, I think it's led partly to a much bigger understanding and appreciation for tracking certainly in the West anyway. So I'm very proud of that.
That's awesome. So there's lots of our listeners are into, well, there's a lot of hunters and bow hunters who'll be listening to this, I would guess. And if nothing else, I like bow hunting. So you can tell me this, answer the question for me. Like, what are your top 3 or 4 tips for somebody when they're out there pursuing a deer or an elk or something that they want to go and, in my case, shoot an arrow at, but in other people's case, whatever. What are those top 3 or 4 things that we need to bear in mind when we are actually tracking that moose print that we've seen or whatever it might well be?
I mean, for me, just to give you a bit of an idea of how I see tracking, I'm not unique in this, but the way I think about it in my head, there are 2 types of tracking. There's track and sign, which is kind of the tracks and signs that you find, the individual things that you see out in nature. So that's everything from scat or shit or poo, whatever you want to call it, but trackers call it scat. Scat, feeding signs, homes, dens, behavioral signs, territorial marks, feathers, seeds which have been eaten by a mouse, all that stuff. That's almost like the library of stuff that you want to build up in your head. And that takes years of experience. It's kind of just building up that library of all that natural history knowledge and all the things that you've seen. And that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is trailing, and that's actually following an animal. So that's not the individual stuff so much. It's more the process of actually being able to trail something. And that's a different skill. But the two are absolutely intertwined. It's crucial that you to be able to trail properly, you have to have an understanding of the tracking sign. So first thing I'd say to people is, don't leave any stone unturned. Even if you're not out trailing an animal on a specific day, everything you learn, every piece of tracking sign that you can see and identify and add to that library in your head will help you. And that goes all the way into things like bird language as well. Things which really experienced and amazing hunters will be able to actually sort of be able to tell whether an animal is out of sight just by the way the birds are behaving. So all of that stuff, first thing I'd say is build up that library. Bring feathers home and identify them. It might not seem like that's going to be very pertinent to you on the next time you're out trailing an elk, but believe me, by the time you've amassed 10 years of that kind of stuff, you are so much more in tune with the landscape and tracking that you're so much better off. That's the first thing I'd say. I guess the next thing I'd say is time. These things take time. You have to be able to learn how to trail something properly, you really have to practice and really, really practice. And I think if people are sort of starting out trailing an animal, start really slowly. Consider it an absolute success if you manage to follow an animal for 100 meters. And if you're ultimately you're not going to be able to trail an animal to see it the first time. These things are difficult, and you will have to just put a lot of time into it. Make life easy. If you're learning how to do it, go to somewhere where the substrate, so that's our posh word for sand, snow, mud, leaf litter, whatever the ground conditions are. Go to somewhere where it's easy and learn your trade there, because it's very difficult to start learning how to trail. In my case, in the UK, the substrate's almost always very difficult. It's usually wet leaf mold, and it's a very difficult place to learn how to trail. So make your life easy. Go somewhere where you can actually see the tracks and build up your confidence, because every time you have a little bit of success, every time you can see another difficult track, you're adding to your knowledge and you're increasing your ability to see finer details. And that's absolutely crucial. And I guess with trailing, I think something I learned from a guy called Mark Elbrock, who's a very famous American tracker, and it really stuck in my head, was that trailing isn't about following footprints. It's about finding animals. And there's a big difference when you think about that. It's not about following every single print. It's not about looking for the next compression. It's about using that library, which I explained beforehand, that natural history knowledge, to be so in tune with the landscape that you can make guesses about where the animal might be. And they're not just guesses, really. They're informed guesses. It's what we call speculative tracking. And it's good trackers like the Bushmen. I've spent time with Bushmen, not in South Africa, but in Namibia. And good trackers who still have traditional tracking knowledge are amazing speculative trackers. It's like they have a sixth sense about where the animal might be. And that isn't magic. I have a bit of a bugbear in the world of tracking, which is that there are plenty of people who pretend that they can hold their hand over a track and just sense where the animal is and what it was doing and what kind of animal it was from the magic that they feel up through the track. Now, I don't believe in any of that. I think I've been out with Bushman trackers and it seemed like magic how good they were at being able to trail an animal, but actually it isn't magic. They have so much experience with that landscape, and all that library in their head is so well developed that they're able to make extremely impressive, informed decisions and be able to trail an animal like you wouldn't believe. So I think that those are kind of the key things I think I've learned about tracking over the years.
It's interesting you mentioned the sixth sense, because if you're directly trailing a a deer or an elk or whatever it may well be, that mammal has a sixth sense as well. And just like if we felt like we were being followed around the Tesco's, around a supermarket or something like that, you'd look over your shoulder. The animals actually have that as well, don't they? And so if you follow their spoor too closely, you actually can end up spooking them by them going, it's a bit weird around here today. So you've kind of got to mix and match where you go.
Exactly. And that is another fundamental skill of trailing, is to be able to do it in such a low-key way that you don't spook the animal before it sees you. So trailing also has a large fieldcraft element to it, where you're very conscious of the wind, the weather, the time of year, and, as I said, things like birds, learning the language of the birds so that they won't give your presence away. So you're behaving in a set way around them so that they don't tell an animal, and they will do that. I mean, animals listen to birds. There's nothing surer than that, because the birds are the eyes and ears of the forest. So that's something. And I think, just going back to my earlier point, something I didn't mention again is this idea that all this stuff you can learn, and the best attribute of a tracker is to ask why. Why is this the way it is? Why did that deer run away? Why did I not get to see it? Why does this track look like this? Why is this leaf munched in a certain way? Why is this happening at this time of year? I mean, to be inquisitive is the best thing you can do when you're trying to learn to track.
It's interesting because it's a skill set where you could learn a lot of the foundation stuff from a book or from a video. But then actually after that, the actual being able to get close enough to a deer to take a shot with a bow, which really is at 30 to 40 meters, to get that close, there's years and years worth of mastery and practice. And as you said, the question why that has to happen. In my case, a vast quantity of very frustrating weekends.
Yeah, and I think for me personally, tracking is part of it. I mean, I don't hunt in the UK. It's difficult to hunt. That's a whole nother kettle of fish. But I do trail animals, and I do try and take pictures of them, and it's exactly the same thing. You still have to get close enough using exactly the same skills to be able to do that. And it does take a long time. And I think one of the things, again, going back to the chat we had earlier about what makes a good teacher, when I'm teaching tracking courses, if I'm teaching trailing, it can seem like an impossible task to actually trail an animal to get close to it. And I think, people I teach with, we try to make it so that people don't walk away from the weekend going, oh, wow, I'll never get there. It's small wins. It's little things that give you the confidence to go out and build on it. And it will take time. There's nothing surer than that.
What's been the most spectacular animal you've managed to get up close and personal with using that skill set? Or not spectacular, maybe the one that sticks in your head is like, wow.
I mean, I've been able to trail animals out in Namibia, some big game species. There's some various antelope, and I've trailed black bear in Colorado. That was quite impressive and things. But I think moose in Maine, they're quite a difficult animal to trail at times, actually, if it's particularly in the summer, if you don't have snow. It can be a lot harder than you think. And people think trailing a moose will be easy, but actually they're very smart. They've got some very incredible ways of avoiding you. So those types of things. But I mean, I would just bring it back to what's local to me, and my successes, my most cherished successes in trailing are being able to trail probably less sexy animals out in the woods near my home, things like roe deer and foxes even, where it's difficult, it's really hard. And because I have a relationship with these animals, because I live here, and these are the animals that I see signs of, and I try to get close on a daily basis, and it's being able to get close to them, I find almost the greatest challenge, and probably my most cherished moments, just because they're my local flora and fauna. So, or not local flora, but my local fauna. So
yeah,
I don't know. I've had some amazing experiences tracking.
Foxes are bloody intelligent as well, aren't they? They are so cunning. It's unbelievable. I don't know how you manage to get up close to those bad boys.
Yeah, a little bit of snow on the ground helps. If it snows in the UK, and it does infrequently now that I live near Manchester, it's that's the first thing I run out the door and try and do. And you don't get long because it melts so quickly. But but yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean, I've had some amazing. I've had, in really dry forest litter, been able to trail badgers for, up to a kilometer and a half. Now that's really quite a difficult thing to do because it's not a particularly big animal. They're big, wide-footed, so they don't leave huge compressions. What you're really looking for there is kind of drag marks and color change in the leaf litter, and because obviously if an animal's dragging leaves as they turn over, there'll be a slightly different color on the underside than they are on the top side. So that's the kind of subtlety that you're learning when you trail in a place like the UK. And actually, that's something I learned from the Bushmen in Namibia. I mean, when I asked the Bushmen how they can tell how old a track is, they talk about the color of it. Now, when you're first learning, when you're first looking at a track, you don't understand what they really mean. But what they really mean by that is, the sand is getting baked by the sun, and it's bleaching it and it's going a light color. And of course, the sand underneath, as it's kicked up, is a darker color and often has maybe a little bit more moisture in it. So it's that very subtle change in color that they look for to tell them the age of the track. And it's sort of learning skills like that in a place that's not local to me and bringing that back to the UK or bring it back to where I live and trying to use that to affect where I actually live.
Wow. Jeepers, what a rabbit hole. I interviewed Will Lord, who you probably know of Will.
Yes, Will, well, yeah.
Well, and he's obviously gone down the prehistoric rabbit hole. And it seems that most people in the bushcraft survivally outdoor living world seem to have a rabbit hole that they end up disappearing down at some point in time. Some people come out the other end, and Will's still going deep back into the history of time.
Yeah, he's picked sort of one rabbit hole and just kept digging. I think one of the things I like about bushcraft is there's lots of different subjects. It suits my personality to delve into something and then climb back out of that rabbit hole and then delve into another one. So, I haven't put a great deal of time into learning more tracking skills over and above, what I normally do on a daily walk for a few years because I've been doing other stuff. And I know that at some point in my life, I'll probably spend a couple of years digging back down into tracking again. And that's one of the great things about bushcraft. There's so many subjects, so much to explore, that you can just keep finding new rabbit holes.
It strikes me that maybe you're into the exploration as much as anything else, the exploration of knowledge, the exploration of places, the exploration of people. Is that your thing?
Yeah, I would absolutely admit to being kind of addicted to learning stuff. And again, it sort of suits my personality in bushcraft to be able to tear into a subject and learn as much as I possibly can, and then find a new subject and a new avenue and explore it. One of the things during this last year has been pretty odd for everybody, and we've been limited to how much outdoor time and outdoor things we've been able to enjoy. So I've spent a lot of time delving into bird language and bird calls, just starting in my garden here and starting to learn some of the language and the simple calls from the birds. And then I'm lucky I can go on a woodland walk really close to my house. And yeah, that's been my rabbit warren. That's been my rabbit hole during lockdown. Something that I had not spent an awful lot of time learning before, but I've been right down into that hole for the last few months. And I know that at some point I'll climb out of it and jump into the next thing.
So you've got a canoe just over one of your shoulders there in that background image, which you made yourself. When did you get into the whole concept of I'm going to start making canoes for myself?
I've got a couple of people to blame for that actually. When I finished university and I started my apprenticeship, I worked for a company which was called Woodsmoke at the time, and there were some very inspirational people there, and I was surrounded by some amazing people. And one of the guys that worked at the time was a guy called Steve Smith, who is kind of just an amazing character. He was a great teacher, very fun guy, really sharp sense of humor, and he was absolutely obsessed with canoes. And at the time, he was making cedar strip canoes, he was making a lot of them, and he was teaching the people that owned the company how to make a cedar strip canoe. And so I was surrounded by these wooden canoes, and not just that, people who were very enthusiastic and very encouraging about learning new things. And I remember Steve Smith saying to me one day, well, you should just make one. And at the time I was probably 21 or 22. I was still living at home, because working in the outdoor industry, as I'm sure most people are aware, you don't make an awful lot of money, certainly in the early days. And so I was living at home, and one day I just decided, right, I'll take him up on it. He helped me sort of teach me how to select the right cedar and where I might be able to get it. And he just encouraged me really to get into it. So I was influenced then. And so I came back, I said, Dad, I'm going to take over your garage and I'm going to build a canoe. Don't worry, it's only going to take me a month or two. 2 years later, after having completely taken over his garage, which was about an inch longer than the finished 17-foot canoe, you couldn't walk around it unless the door was open. I finished this canoe, and so it was a cedar strip canoe, which a lot of amateurs build cedar strip canoes, because the form that you have to make to build one is fairly simple. It takes about a week to make, and you can make it out of MDF, and you don't need any real specialist woodworking skills, I would say. A lot of people can achieve it. So I sort of muddled my way through that, but I got to the end of that. I'd learned two things. I'd learned that I loved building stuff out of wood. That was the first thing I'd learned. And I also learned that I never wanted to work with fiberglass and epoxy resin ever again. So I was left in a situation where I wanted to build another.
Scratching yourself for hours on end with all the little bits of fiberglass, anything else.
Everything about working with fiberglass and epoxy I hated. I hated the smell. I hated how toxic it seemed. I hated the fact that, you when you're building a canoe like that, you pour a whole load of glue onto it and then you scrape most of it off. As you say, the little shards of fiberglass get everywhere. I just didn't enjoy it, but I loved the woodwork aspect of it. I loved making the wooden boat. So a few years later, I was introduced to, again, actually in North America, in Maine, some fairly old school woodsmen and woodswomen, I suppose you would say, called Garrett Conover and Alexandra Conover Bennett. And I went to do a snowshoe trip with them, and they had wooden canvas boats hanging in their barn. And I looked at these canoes and I said, wow, it's almost one stage back in the evolution of the canoe. It's before fiberglass and epoxy. You make a wooden hull, but you cover it in canvas instead. And I kind of looked at these boats. I thought, wow, they're even more beautiful than cedar strip canoes, and you don't have to use epoxy. But they take quite a lot more effort, as I discovered, quite a bit more money, because the materials are a bit more expensive, and quite a bit more skill. So I sort of took what I'd learned on all the mistakes I'd made from building the cedar strip canoe, and then I basically embarked with a friend of mine called Willow Lore. We spent a winter building one of these things in an extremely cold barn in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. It was about -5 most days that we were trying to build this canoe, and trying to steam bend wood at -5 is interesting. But anyway, we about 4 or 5 months later, we ended up with a wooden canvas boat that we're extremely proud of. And I loved it. I'd kind of found my niche. That behind me is a wooden canvas boat. That's probably about the 4th or 5th one that I've made. That's one of my own personal boats. And I'd found something that I love doing, because a lot of it's handwork. You're using traditional hand tools. You're using natural materials. It's just really wood, a few metal fixings, but they're brass and bronze, and canvas and some oil. And so I just love it. I love everything about it, the process of it, but they're quite an involved thing to build, I have to say.
It's taken you less than 2 years to make a boat now after the first one.
Well, after the experience of the first one, I actually kept a journal building the second boat to the hour to see how long it took me. And it took me 800 hours. I remember it. I'll never forget it. When I tallied it up, I couldn't quite believe it. And but now I've got a few machines now that make some of the parts of the process a little bit easier. Mostly the milling stages, not the fancy steam bending and all the intricate stuff, but the grunt work at the beginning. I've got a few machines now make that a little bit easier. So I can do a boat in, I suppose, somewhere between 200 and 300 hours now. So it's still quite an investment in time, but it's much quicker than it used to be.
Geez, it's still 5 to 7 weeks of your working life, though, isn't it? If you choose to, yeah. Unless you can get.
I don't advise anybody try to make a living at it.
I was going to say, unless you can sell each boat for $15,000 a throw, like, don't even bother turning it into a job.
No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. I learned that lesson a long time ago. I mean, the last boat I built, because I love doing it, the last boat I built was actually a lady who phoned me and she said, I'm Canadian, but I live in the UK. I've lived here for 30 years and I found your website and I saw your canoes and I just had this, she said, I almost shed a tear because it reminded me of my childhood in Canada, paddling around on these boats. So she said, please, will you build me one? And I thought, well, how can I turn that down? So that was the last boat that I built. I probably made about minimum wage building it, which is not a lot of money, but it was just lovely. They have a holiday cottage on Norfolk Broads, which is a sort of wetland area down the south of England, and she sends me pictures all the time of her paddling around in it. So it's a nice thing to do. It makes me happy, but I wouldn't want to feed a family on it.
No. And are you following sort of a traditional prospector design and shape for the boat, or do you have something different that you're following?
Yeah, it's different actually. So again, going back to those people in Maine who I've been fortunate to spend time with, they come from a tradition of a New England tradition where you tend to have fairly long boats, and the boats that are local to that area they're not prospectors, they're quite a different shaped hull, but they're certainly very good guiding canoes. There's a rich tradition of guiding in Maine, and all of what you find there is a lot of the rivers are quite shallow in the summer, so you need a slightly different design possibly than a prospector. So the designs I make are boats that I learned I kind of was introduced to in New England, and probably the most famous and one of the best wooden canvas boat builders, a guy called Roland Thurlow, who has a workshop in Maine. I've visited him many times, and he's a lovely old chap, and he's been building canoes forever. And so I use his designs because I just think his boats are absolutely fantastic. I've got two forms. You have to build that's one of the reasons why you don't find many amateur builders build a wooden canvas boat, because you almost have to build a whole canoe first before you actually build a canoe. And the form is quite an investment of time. It also is about a 3-person lift to move it. So once you've built it, storing it, and it becomes a bit of a headache if you're only going to build one canoe. So I have 2 forms, though. I have a 17-foot boat to Roland Thurlow's design, and then I have a 15-foot boat, which is just a shrunken down version of the larger boat. The one behind me is a 15-foot boat, which he calls a Cheeman. And he just very kindly let me use his canoe plans, and I just build. I don't think, in the words I asked him once in his workshop, is he constantly designing new canoes? And he says, well, to be honest, at this stage, there's not much to reinvent with canoes. So I just took that advice and I just build his designs, and I just find them beautiful.
Looks stunning. So when you move house, you're looking for either a very large garage or another workshop space to go and put that stuff in.
Yeah, well, we moved a year ago, and I do have a garage and I do have my canoes in there, but it's not big enough for the forms. So the forms, again, they're a bit of a headache. So they're actually under a tarpaulin at the in-laws' house. It's the only place I could find to be able to store them. So yeah, they are quite a thing. You sometimes find that people will share a form. You'll have various canoe clubs and stuff will have a form that does its way around. But those canoes, the wooden canvas canoes, don't have a rich tradition in the UK. So it's very rare to see one, and it's even rarer to find somebody who has built one or builds them. There are a couple of people, but not many.
Yeah, I've honestly, I mean, I've been involved in canoeing for jeepers a long time, and I've never seen a wood canvas. Actually, that's not true. Maybe once at a symposium I was working at in the UK, I saw a wooden canvas boat, but the rest I've seen lots of plywood boats and quite a few cedar strips, but the wooden canvas. And you're now explaining the reason why I haven't seen very many of them.
Yeah, I mean, you'll get a lot of plywood boats because it's a really great, manageable, quick, fairly reasonably priced project for beginners. Cedar strips, you have to be a little bit more invested, but you can still pull that off on a reasonable budget, and with a few less tools and that kind of thing. Wooden canvas is another one up again. It takes quite a bit of time.
So is that the progression? If people want to go build their own canoes, is it best to start like go make one out of plywood, then go make a cedar strip boat, and then move on to the wood and canvas afterwards? Or
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That would be a really sensible thing to do. Try a plywood boat and see if you like it. See if you like woodwork, and see if you like paddling. And that guy I mentioned before, who kind of inspired me to build a wooden canvas, to build a cedar strip canoe back in the day. His name's Steve Smith. He runs courses in the UK, and he'll have people arriving on a Monday, and by the Friday they're driving away with a canoe on the roof. And that's amazing. You know, a lot of people, he's inspired a lot of people to get into canoeing and a lot of people to actually build those boats. And I think it's great. You know, I think anything that encourages people to get outside, I think it's great. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't advise running out and buying the book on how to build wooden canvas boats and starting there. I think you'd be much better off trying something more simple. Or try a paddle. Try a paddle and then see how you get on.
I was going to ask, I was about to assume, but do you make your own wooden paddles as well?
Yes, I do. Yeah. And actually, I made one of the reasons I decided to take on the challenge of a wooden boat to begin with is I'd been making a few paddles at the time, and I'd already learned quite a lot about woodwork, and you know, I'm kind of a self-taught woodworker. I started by making spoons and carving things around the campfire, and then advanced to maybe ladles and various bigger projects, and then building bows. So I've been making bows for probably 15, almost 18 years now.
Traditional longbows.
Yeah, so I make wooden longbows. Yeah, so I'd been doing all that, and then I went from there to a paddle, and then a canoe just seemed like just the next thing. It was quite a big jump from a paddle to a canoe, I have to say.
Well, is that, or you've got to go and find a piece of land and build a log cabin, I suppose, one or the other?
That would be the next thing. In recent years, I'm satisfying my desire to learn more about carpentry by taking up oak framing. So I've been doing a little bit of traditional green oak carpentry.
Oh, nice.
Something different again, but it's just all a journey, isn't it?
Wow, that's cool. So a lot of people watching this or listening to this have love the outdoors, and I've always wondered about working in the outdoors. What's your advice? You can't say don't do it. That's okay. That's just one caveat. But what's your advice to people out there, be them young or maybe they're mid-30s to I don't know, late 40s? They've got a career that they've had enough of, and they love the outdoors and want to earn their living from it. What advice do you have for people to go and get out there and start earning their living in the great outdoors?
Well, I guess I'd have to say do it. Do it. Get out and do it if that's what makes you happy. But do it knowing a few things. So I guess my experience is only one experience, but my experience of working in the outdoors, there are a few things that will help. I guess the first thing would be know that it's going to be a difficult, and in my case, it's a difficult, it started, less so now because I've been doing it for a long time now. So, but when I first started, it's very difficult to have any kind of security and to kind of just be able to live on it. Well, I mean, I worked for free for quite a while because I guess I did an old school apprenticeship where, you just had to learn your trade. And that has massive benefits because it sort of, you prove to yourself that you really want to do this. But you also kind of do it for 2 or 3 years and then you think, wow, I need to actually make a living. So I guess the first thing I'd say is do it if you're enthusiastic about it, but be wise to the fact that it's not going to be easy. Probably work's going to be seasonal. That's one of the biggest things about working in the outdoors. It doesn't really matter where you live in the world. Even if you live in a place with a fairly stable climate like the tropics, you're still going to have rainy seasons and things where people won't be going outside as much. I mean, certainly in the UK, I find it difficult to get work in the UK after about September or October. And that doesn't really kick in again till April. So there are going to be chunks of the year where it's quite difficult to make a living. And you'll have moments at Christmas where you go, wow, I'm 4 months in. And so, I mean, I've worked every part-time job you can possibly imagine. I mean, my first years working in the outdoor industry, I worked in bars nonstop. So I'd work in bars until the small hours of the morning, and then the next day I would get up and sometimes teach bushcraft or sometimes just learn. So be aware that it's not going to be too easy, but definitely do it. And a good piece of advice would be have a couple of other strings to your bow. I'll give you an example. When I was learning bushcraft, I didn't take that advice, and I just spent all the hours I could learning bushcraft and trying to just better my outdoor skills. And a friend of mine, during the winter time, that was the down period, he was out learning how to be a personal trainer because he was interested in fitness. So one winter he learned how to be a personal trainer, and then the second winter he learned how to be a tree surgeon. And so he kind of got 2 years down the line, and he now had 3 jobs he could pick from. So he was then able to say, well, okay, if when the outdoor downtime comes in the wintertime, I'll just do a bit of tree surgery, or I'll just get a job in a gym for a few and do some private tuition when it comes to physical stuff. So that's a really good piece of advice. I would definitely say to people, try to diversify a little bit, even if it's something like getting a trade or a piece of some kind of laboring you can do, or learning a little bit of woodwork, carpentry, joinery, whatever it might be. That will really help, and that's helped me massively over the years to be able to turn my hands to a few other things. And I think just understand that you're probably never going to make a fortune, but you have to be okay with that. And I have kind of periods where I hit 30 and thought, wow, I wanted to have children at 30, and I thought, oh, wow, the instability of the outdoor industry is quite difficult. And as soon as you've got children, that changed the game a little bit. And I definitely had a moment of crisis at 30 and thought, wow, can I really sustain a career in the outdoor industry? So I had a break from it for a couple of years and did joinery and woodwork jobs where I could get home in the evening, because a lot of my outdoor work I'm away from home. And I'm sort of 4 or 5 years on from that period now, and I'm actually going back to the outdoor industry again. I'm going back to it because I miss it, and I'm going back to it because I realized all along that that's what I wanted to do. So it's it can be turbulent, but I would say to people, stick with it, and you'll make it work.
Yeah, I always think that the more experience you've got in the outdoors, getting off the beaten track, the better the easier you will find to go and get any qualifications that you will need to go and get, or so on and so forth. There's so many people come for like a mountain leader training, and they've been up and down the big mountains in the UK, and they've just followed the footpaths the entire time, and so they've got lots of time in their log. And then you take them off the footpaths, and we start following ridge lines and then compass or GPS within bad weather, and suddenly they're turned about. They just have no idea which way up is. And I think the more experience you can have off the beaten track, the better before you start doing it, because that's essentially that's what you're selling when you're in the outdoors. Is you're selling your experience, really, what you've learned from it.
Definitely, and I think I'm talking about diversifying into different areas or different jobs, such as working in a bar or becoming a personal trainer. But that also goes for working in the outdoor industry. I mean, my experience is mostly in bushcraft, where there aren't a lot of qualifications you can do. There are a couple of qualifications, but there's nothing really bona fide where you can say, wow, this person is extremely experienced in wilderness skills. There isn't that ticket yet, and it might come, but I would definitely say, I've done mountaineering qualifications, I've done canoeing qualifications, I've made sure that I get the best medical training I can. All these things which enable me to be able to take different jobs in the outdoors have definitely helped. And I mean, in recent years, a lot of my outdoor work has actually been consultancy on TV productions, and that requires a different set of skills. And I'm finding things which I trained in years ago, such as mountaineering qualifications, which I haven't used in bushcraft and wilderness skills for a few years, are making me more employable now, and are becoming things which I'm using on a daily basis. So definitely diversify your experience and qualifications in the outdoors as well.
So what does just fill me in, working as a TV consultant in the outdoors, what does that really involve and mean?
Well, I'm not going to burst any bubbles.
Long hours, wet, cold, and miserable. I know.
Yeah, well, I would say Yeah, I would say that working for production companies, my experience has been working on sort of TV survival shows where there's definitely, because it's large productions and they're in remote areas and they're very adventurous shows, there's a need for a consultant to look after the bushcraft and wilderness side of it. So to advise the production, sometimes to advise the on-screen talent or celebrity, whoever that might be, and to provide a health and safety role. So somebody who's looking out for the crew. And that's been my experience working for productions. It's usually to offer some advice about the locations, the safety of the crew, and maybe what bushcraft and survival skills they might be able to demonstrate during the show. So that's, in a nutshell, what my work has been. I've done quite a bit of that over the last 4 or 5 years.
It's interesting because when you watch some of these documentaries and shows and you see some, I don't know, not Bear Grylls, we won't use his name, but like you see an expert and you can let yourself be lulled into the fact that it's just them and a dude with a camera and that's the end of it. I can't see a Discovery Channel or a History Channel or anything else like doing something that low key and that low budget. There must be you guys behind pulling strings and doing whatever else is needed.
Well, like I say, I don't want to burst any bubbles, but yes, I mean, something to understand about productions of that nature is that, the safety of the crew is always taken very, very seriously. So these productions, they might be incredibly adventurous and they might be very difficult to shoot, but there's always somebody like me and probably usually a team of paramedics and well-trained health and safety personnel making sure that everybody's safe. And that's really important. You couldn't make that show without it. And actually, it doesn't take anything away from the finished show. It just means that it's possible to make it. And it's important that people are there.
Well, it's that whole thing that in some environments, it's all most people do can act to actually keep themselves safe, just focusing on the environment themselves. But then if they've got to, I don't know, use a camera, or they've got to talk to a camera, or they've got to do whatever it may well be, you end up in we just call it an interesting, potentially interesting environment where you're busy multitasking. And we all know that things slip when you start multitasking in too many different directions. So
exactly. And I think that's the thing to understand. I mean, I'm just back just before Christmas. I was on a 6-week recce in China, looking at locations for a TV survival show. And that was my job. There were only 4 of us because it was a recce. We were looking at locations. We weren't filming anything. But, there was a director there and a production manager and a translator. And we were going to really extreme places. We were at high altitude, 1 week. And then the next week we were crossing a really remote river. And the next week we were in the jungles in the south of China. And then the next week we were in -20 in the boreal forest and on the border of Russia. So, the director's got some outdoor experience, but he's not fully qualified and experienced to be able to go to these remote places. So there's a good example of my role, where I went there and made sure they were safe. I would look at the environment, make sure everybody had what they needed, and then I was on hand with experience to be able to put things right should we get into any difficulty. So there's always somebody needed to do that role, and it's a very important role.
Yeah, and you just touched on then the breadth of experience and knowledge that you need to go and do something successfully as a career often is, you've mentioned high altitude. I think, did you mention desert, river crossing, and -20 in a forest? Those are remarkably different environments to go and work and operate in.
They are, and that job is a great example of it. In a 6-week period, we were in not desert, although I have been to the desert in China, but we jungle. 1 minute we were in 25, hot and sweaty, covered in leeches. The next week we were above 4,000 meters, and it was very cold. And then we were in the far north at -20 in deep snow, and then we were crossing a pretty spectacular river canyon the next week. So I'm actually involved in helping set up the shoot, which is going to go ahead in the next couple of weeks. I won't be involved in the shoot, but I'm helping it now, and I'm trying to give advice to the production company on somebody that can go and do my job on the shoot. And it's very difficult to find somebody who can go to those. I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but ultimately it's difficult to find somebody who's got that experience in those different locations, and each location has its own needs. And it's very specific. So there aren't that many people that we can call on to kind of do that job. So it's a very specific skill set. But what I would say is that nothing I've ever done over the years has ever been wasted time. You know, I find myself calling on skills all the time, which I learned 5, 10, maybe even 15 years ago, places I've been to, lessons I've learned, mistakes I've made. And I find myself calling on that experience all the time.
It's interesting. I ended up last year. Where are we now? No, 2019. I still think we're 2020, but in 2019, doing a piece of work. And when I was in my teens, I was in the Scouts in the UK, and we had a very, very, very adventurous scout troop. And the leaders loved setting us the world's most complicated, like pioneering pole and rope challenges. Can you cross this? Can you do that? And I haven't visited or thought about, a square knot or anything like that for probably 30 years. And then suddenly you're in that place and you dumped some rope and some wood and said, we need to go and do this, get here. And actually you're like, oh, I'm really glad I learned that 30 years ago and it's still got a use. And I think people, a bit like your tracking, every time you go out and practice your hand at tracking, you may never see the animal, but it's important to recognize you're still learning, even if you don't achieve your end objective. And then to be able to reuse that at some point in time.
Absolutely. I think, we often, and a few colleagues of mine and I over the years have often had conversations about the demise of the generalist. And, we often, there's a few of us, people I've worked with and find inspirational people over the years, are people who generalists actually. I mean, there is a place for somebody who takes a skill or a set discipline and just goes to town on it. But actually, there are a few people who are just really good generalists in the outdoors, and those are the people that you often learn the most from, I think. And certainly the people I've found the most inspirational teachers in my life are people who've just seen the outdoors as this almost one entity, and they've just decided, I'm going to be an outdoors person, and they've got, these are the people who are much better placed to deal with much more of what nature can throw at you than the people who just have one skill. And actually, I've found that working in the production company and in the TV industry, some of the best people I've worked with are those very people. They're capable of doing that job because they have a real depth of experience and they're good generalists.
I love it. I love it. You can get I call it like one trick ponies. There's guys who I know who on a certain river in North Wales can like get people to go from 0 to hero in a whitewater kayak in about 34 seconds, or that's what it feels like. And yet when those people then come with you and go to the Swiss Alps or something like that to go kayaking, suddenly it doesn't work anymore because it only works on that one specific section of Whitewater River in North Wales in the UK. I guess I like the phrase, and I'm not being sexist when I say this, but like the words outdoorsman and woodsman and those sort of phrases, the people who can, woodsman, I always think, can go into the woods, whether it's the 1st of January or the 1st of July, they can be equally at home and equally comfortable and equally able. And maybe the outdoors is one of the last places left to us in 2021, where actually being a generalist is a really, really good thing in a world that celebrates experts at a certain thing.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. And I think certainly looking at the outdoor industry over my sort of 15, 20-year career, there are still plenty of elements of the outdoors where it's a very specific thing, and that's fine. And I tend to think of those things as much more of a recreational so the sorts of outdoor activities that people go to do recreation, to get away, to have an adventure, to do all that kind of thing. And I haven't spent my life doing that kind of outdoor activity. Okay, I've done some, but my canoeing, for example, when I'm out in a boat, for me, it's as much about the nature that I see, the weathers, the seasons, the time of the year, the bushcraft to be done along the way, the fishing, the cooking over the fire, the time spent with friends around the fire. It's much more about that than it is about the going down the river. So I totally wholeheartedly agree. And I think to be able to enjoy that kind of outdoor experience, you're much better placed to enjoy it as a generalist. And I think I've often, I think it's good to have heroes. I've got plenty of heroes, and I've got lots of people that I hold in quite high esteem who I've found very inspirational over the years. And the pattern for me is that they generally tend to be well-rounded outdoors people with general skills who you could throw anything at them, and it's much more of a mindset with them. It's much more, how do I approach this problem, and how do I and I recognize my limitations, and that's quite key. And those people are almost always generalists. They're not the specialist expert in one field. They're definitely people with broad experience.
Yeah. I often think, if you feel poorly and go to the doctor, you actually go to a general practitioner, a GP first. They're the people who actually sort out probably 90+% of medical ailments. And life gets very complicated and weird when you step into the world of specialists, specialist doctors. I don't know, it always feels, I had my ears drilled the other year, and yeah. So I think being a generalist is very much underplayed. Now, on the topic of generalists, you and your friend Ed Stafford have been.
Sorry, you might want to start that question again because my partner just came into the room. Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. So on the topic of generalists, you and your friend Ed Stafford have been producing a series of online programs for people to learn bushcraft with. Tell us more about how that is, what that is, where the inspiration came from, and what people can learn from you.
Well, that came from working on an Ed Stafford television show. I was, as I explained before, working as a consultant on one of his shows actually in China last year. And him and I got on really well together, and we just enjoyed each other's company. We had a laugh, and we talked a lot about our different approaches to the outdoors. I'm kind of more of a textbook bushcrafter, wilderness skills kind of guy, put a lot of time into the books and teaching and learning and all that stuff. And Ed's, he'd be the first to admit, he's kind of a bit of a blunt instrument. He was the first person to walk the length of the Amazon, and he just did it. He just got up one day and he flew to the Amazon and he just walked the length of the Amazon River. So he would be the first, again, probably to admit that he was, probably underprepared and didn't have all the survival skills and perhaps wilderness skills that he maybe should have had before he embarked on that. But he got through it, and we spent a lot of time talking about the mindset and the approach that enabled him to do that, and what his successes had been, and what he'd learned along the way about survival. And he's gone on to do lots of other survival experiments and TV shows, and it's always been kind of slightly make it up as you go along kind of survival, what works, what doesn't, and that kind of thing. So we talked about our different approaches, and we talked about what we might be able to offer. And he said to me one day, well, I think we should maybe film some online bushcraft courses. I think, if you and I came together, we might be able to make something that would be useful to people. And we didn't talk much about it until lockdown happened. First lockdown in the UK. All of my work was grounded, all of his work was grounded. And he phoned me up and he said, well, why don't we make those bushcraft videos that we talked about? So because we couldn't film at the time, because of the strict rules of lockdown, we decided to start trying to prepare for if lockdown did actually lift. So we managed to secure a really talented filmmaker, a guy called Ben Sherlock, who we phoned up and we said, we don't have any money, and we're just going to do this for fun. We're going to do it for fun. We're going to do it because we want to. And if you want to make these films for us, that'd be great. And he said yes, which amazed us both, because he also didn't have any work, and because of the COVID, and he had a lot of expensive camera equipment sitting at home. And he said, yeah, why not? So we waited and waited until the rules relaxed just enough for us to be able to go into the woods. And I'll be honest, we went with no real plan. I'd written a schedule for our first bushcraft lessons and what we might film in a week. We went to the woods with all the kit. I had all the plans. I talked Ed through what we should film, and we just sat about filming it. And we We filmed about a quarter of what I'd planned in the week, and we filmed about 12 hours of content, and then we ended up the first subject we decided to tackle was fire, because we felt fire was absolutely crucial to any, well, fundamental to any outdoors person. So what we tried to create was the most comprehensive course we could, given the situation, on fire. And what we ended up with is about 4 hours of online lessons. And it covers everything from selecting materials, what to look for in firewood, and we go into detail on tinders and how to use lots of different fire lighting methods. So we talk about, percussion, which is using sparks. We talk about how to rub sticks together. We do a whole 1 hour lesson on fire by friction. We do the hand drill, the bow drill, also the bamboo fire saw for anybody in the tropics. And we watched it all back, and we're really proud of it. That first course, we felt just gave people 4 hours of really detailed tuition on how to get good with fires. So we were inspired by the first course, and then we went out and we filmed the second course on cooking. Again, we filmed about a tenth of what I'd planned to film. So that cooking one is a bit of a to be continued.
There's a theme here, by the way.
Yes, I know. So, but again, that course is about 4 hours of really cool campfire cooking techniques, including cooking underground using hot rocks, and how to braise over the fire, how to manage fires for cooking, how to butchery's in there, how to butcher a deer. We do that start to finish. I make biltong, actually smoked venison biltong,
Nice.
which I smoked slowly over the fire. It took me a week to do it, so we filmed that in stages over the week. So it's quite detailed. And then the third one that we shot was tools. We went back to the beginning, back to basics, and we did knives and axes. And then we plan to do kind of saws and machetes and all that at a later date. So there's about 12 hours of online content there, and I'm really proud of it. We worked really hard to make the best course we could.
Awesome. And if people are interested in buying that, they can go to bushcraft.academy, or just go click the link below and go and check it out. And you guys are also on YouTube on a daily basis, you were telling me before I hit record. Is that just is that Stephen and Ed just shooting the breeze, or what's all that about?
That's another one of Ed's harebrained ideas. That's we're about a week into the third full-scale lockdown in the UK. So most people are grounded. You can only work if you're a key worker, or you can't work from home. So again, we're locked down. A lot of families are, at home with kids. Not everybody can go to school at the moment. So we decided, Ed phoned me up and he said, why don't we do YouTube live every morning during the whole of lockdown at 10 a.m. We'll do half an hour, and we'll do a bushcraft skill or a wilderness skill every day, and people can join in, and we'll do shout outs. And we have a bit of, I can say it's live, so people can chat to us, and they can ask questions. And so we're doing that. It's Friday today, so we've done a whole week of that. And I'm back up on Monday. Ed filmed this morning. He did how to light a fire with magnesium fire striker. Yesterday morning, I showed how to make a simple bow and arrow. They're kind of aimed at children. They're aimed at kids from about 7 years, maybe even 5, but 7 years up. And they're simple projects that people can get involved with, but also there's lots of really interesting stuff that people can learn. I mean, during my bow session yesterday, people asked me a lot of questions, and I ended up digressing, as you can imagine, well off into how to fletch an arrow with feathers, and how to select the right wood for the bow, and much more beyond the actual skill of making the bow, which was more of an activity for children. So I think there was a lot of interesting stuff in there.
That's cool. Well, the more people who can see and hear you and love you, the better life will be for everybody. And as I was saying the other day, I think sometimes we get confused in the outdoors about what our jobs really are. And I firmly believe my job is to get more people loving the outdoors on a weekly, monthly basis. And if I do that, the outdoors will thrive, it'll be looked after better. And all those people who are struggling to make ends meet in the outdoors might have a few more customers wandering around saying, hey, can you teach me to do whatever it may well be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that for me is the essence of bushcraft and wilderness skills. The reason I'm into it is really because I think it's the best outdoor pursuit or activity you can do for engaging with nature. I can't think of a better one. I just think, if you can go out into a forest and you know how to identify all the plants and trees, and you know the sounds of the birds, and you know the right wood to collect to rub sticks together to be able to make a fire that makes your whole situation much better. And all the things you're learning about your mind and your muscles and everything that comes with it, I just think it's perfect for that. And those bushcraft videos you mentioned, and also those live YouTubes we're doing, are really about that. It's all about reconnecting with nature, and I think it's something that's sadly missing in the modern world. And I'm really proud to be able to offer things to people which can help them re-engage with nature. That's what it's all about for me.
That's super cool. Now, before we press go on the interview, I said, Stephen, you're going to have a chance to have a rant about something, and now is that time. Are you ready for your We Get Outdoors rant?
Yes, I mean this. So this has been sprung on me just before we started. So I'm sure, like everybody you ask, they're frantically thinking of something. But the first thing that came to mind, particularly, I'll keep it outdoors based, but a rant of mine probably would be, I've got this canoe website and I build these canoes, and they're very specific canoes. And I appreciate that there's a lot of, there's not much information on how to build these canoes. And when people see the website and they see the canoes, they think, wow, what an amazing thing. How do you build it? How do you do all this? And my biggest bugbear is I get a lot of emails. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people email me saying, literally the email will say this. It will say, where do you get the canvas? That's it. Or what wood is that? Or can you tell me how to hammer this nail into the form the way that you have? That's it. And I guess my gripe, and it's a strange one, but my gripe is, I think partly because if you see my website and you see my other website about, what I do bushcraft wise, I probably seem like the sort of chap who's very keen and enthusiastic to answer questions, and I am. That's not a problem. My problem here is not with the email that says trying to help someone, how to do something. My problem is it's just rude. All I need from the email is, hello, Stephen. Loved your website, loved the canoes. Such an interesting thing. I'm so glad I found somebody who's making these things. Would you mind if I ask you a question? And then start with, and then end it by saying, thanks very much for your time. So that's my sort of gripe, and I'm getting that out there because that happens so often. I mean, 2 or 3 times a week I get an email, and it literally is just somebody thinking that I'm kind of sitting here just waiting for them to send me an email or give me a ring so I can just dispense all of my hard-won wisdom on somebody who's probably never going to build one of those big canoes, let's face it. So that's my gripe. I'll take questions. It's no problem at all. I love answering questions, but please just be polite. That's my gripe.
So there is links to all of Stephen's websites beneath here. And so if you're going to send him a message on social media or an email from one of those sites, please say like, hi, how are you today? I've been inspired by you. I'm doing this. And could I just get 20 seconds of your time to ask you this quick question, please?
Yeah, exactly. Or another thing, even better than that, the emails I really love are people who send me a picture of something they're working on, and they'll say, I'm working on this and I'm having trouble with this. Would you mind at all if I could pick your brains? And that's a completely different flavor of email. I love getting those emails. I love being able to answer people's questions if they're stuck, because I've asked so many people over the years questions, and people have helped me, and that's great. But what I do resent is somebody sending me an email that's a one-liner that just expects some kind of response. That's my gripe.
Yeah, especially if it's like, where do I buy these nails from in Florida? And you're like, I have no idea. People send me emails because they know I live in South Africa, although I am a Brit. So I'm not South African, and I've only lived here for 7 years. So I don't know very much about South Africa. And they sent me this email, like expecting some expert answer. I was like, oh, wrong person, wrong place.
Yeah. I'm getting, as I get older, I get a little better with the delete button on the emails. I get a little bit more trigger happy with the delete button if it's not.
So my business partner sends all of his emails once a day. He puts them in a folder to auto send at 9 o'clock in the morning. And when he wakes up over a cup of coffee in the morning, he goes and rechecks yesterday's emails he'd written and worked out if he actually wants to send all of them, or if there's one that he's been a bit too flippant on, or should just click delete.
Yeah, that's a very wise thing to do, isn't it? Always read something the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Stephen, I just want to say thank you to you. We need more Stephen Hantons in the world, taking people out there and infusing them in the outdoors, and inspiring them to get out and engage with the outdoors in a way that offers respect to the outdoors, as opposed to just get there, trash it, and leave. We need more of you, and more people who are going to get out there and start, like you're doing with Ed, making the outdoors more easily accessible in terms of we can come to your phone or we can come to your laptop way, as opposed to the traditional outdoors way, which is, we know you want to learn it, but you've got to jump in a car for 3 hours to get to us, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to say thank you for that, because we need more of you. That's 100% certain.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And yeah, I mean, the idea of those videos really is to just make it accessible. We didn't make those I don't do any of the online stuff with the intention of that replacing outdoor activities. That's not what it's about. It's much more about just showing people that there are different ways to learn, and it's about inspiring people to look at that and then close a laptop and go outside and practice it. It's making it more accessible. I hope it's making it more accessible. That's the point. And yeah, thanks very much for having me. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. We've had a nice chat. We've got lots of common interests. So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Cool. Thank you, Stephen. Folks, if anybody wants to go and hang out with Stephen, check him out, invite him to speak somewhere, coach somewhere, teach somewhere, or just go and star on TV with you, I don't really mind. All his web addresses are below, so go click on those. And Stephen, thank you for your time today.
Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your day.